have to say, I am very impressed that so many of you guys came out on, one, a very gloomy day, and two, a day where we all lost an hour of sleep, and we're very upset about that. So thank you for being here. We have an amazing day of panels that we've curated just for you guys with incredible panelists, starting with these gorgeous humans here. So without further ado, let me do quick intros as if they even need introductions. And then let's get to the juicy conversation. So I guess that's yours. I feel like Oprah over here. Welcome to my couch. I have with me Grace Dunham. Big round of applause, please. Who is an incredible poet, LGBTQ activist. You might recall seeing Grace on Tiny Furniture or Girls. So give her a round of applause. Thanks for being here. We have Yara Shahidi, who you might know as Zoe from ABC's Blackish, or just from, being an overall badass who speaks all over the world, particularly speaks about or promotes girls in STEM, which is a really important cause, and we'll get more into that later. And then we have Rowan Blanchard, who is an outspoken feminist, a talented actress who's going to be coming out in one of the most anticipated movies of next year, A Wrinkle in Time, and I don't know about you, but I can't wait for that. And it's directed by our mutual icon, Ava DuVernay. I'm gonna move this because it's kind of burning my legs off. I'm kind of melting. So let's jump right into it. I think a great place to start, obviously the panel is about the intersection of art and activism. And I think that, we all know we're living during some really intense times politically. And what's great about that is that it's a rich time culturally. Like, there's so much going on to talk about in art and culture, and you guys have a lot to do with that. So I think a great place to start is to just define what activism means to you guys. And Rowan, I use your definition a lot. By the way, everyone on this panel has been featured in Teen Vogue. Grace is in Teen Vogue this month. Make sure you pick one up. Shameless plug. And Yara and Rowan were both cover stars for December. So yes. So anyway, you gave an amazing definition for activism that felt very inclusive and one that everyone can kind of wrap their heads around, which was that, I'll leave it to you to give me your definition of activism.
I hope I'm not misquoting myself.
Well, I'll check. I will fact check you.
I think it was something along the lines of activism is like a need to know, a need to help, and a need to explain.
Boom.
I feel like that's what I said.
Boom.
I guess
good memory.
The definition of activism for me is constantly changing, and I hope that, especially during this administration, the term activist can kind of become something that you can figure out individually, and it's not something that you have to concretely fit, but that's something that you can kind of innately become. So, yeah.
Yeah, I guess going off of that, it is an ever-changing word. Realized, okay, is it on? Okay, you can hear me. But I realized that for a long time I was uncomfortable with calling myself an activist, where I'd even say I'm a self-proclaimed activist, as though I wasn't worthy of the word. And so it just made me realize that activism is really trying to find a way to express yourself through a channel of being, or trying to create space for a way of being or a way of living that is inclusive of all people. And in that, it means that there's so many ways to be a part of helping that space come to light and come to fruition. In which case, I no longer have to say self-proclaimed, because I am an activist and I'm proud to be one.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think in addition to the fact that it's like this ever-changing practice and this ever-changing process, for me, it's also about never stopping asking questions and never stopping listening. That's a really important part for me. Like, in a world, as we know, where we're surrounded by people and, institutions like schools or people with power, telling us how things are supposed to be and telling us how we're supposed to be, it's such a powerful stance to take, to say, when someone tells me they're hurt, I listen. When someone tells me they're not getting what they need, I listen. When someone tells me that they need things to be different, I'm gonna listen to that. And I'm gonna think about that and try to incorporate that into my life and into the work that I do.
That's awesome. Well said. I think we know two things by looking at history during times of political unrest. One is that artists get to work, and two is that young people are usually on the right side of history. And we're living in a really incredible time in terms of hearing from a lot of new, fresh, young, progressive voices, including all of yours. And I think to some extent, there is this notion that if you've decided to be an artist and if you're young, you really don't have a place in this political conversation, right? You choose one and pick a lane. But all three of you have done a really great job kind of combining those aspects of your identities. So I'd like to talk to you guys about that and where you see your position in the world today and how you find a way to integrate your political stance with your creative work. Go to any of you guys.
Okay.
Popcorn it. Yara, you're up.
Well, then I'd have to say it is intimidating. Okay. Mic going out. Here I am. Okay. It can be intimidating, especially.
Do you want to use mine?
It can be intimidating as a young artist to take a stance because it's a very public place to be, to say this is what I stand for and that I am growing and learning in the public eye as well. But I'd have to say, like, even with my role on Blackish, it's really given me a platform to express the complexities of my generation and of what it's like to be a young woman of color. And while Zoe's experience isn't everybody's experience, it's been 3 years in the making of just trying to make her as complex of a human, as real of a human as possible, because these narratives matter. And in a day and age in which we are surrounded by media, and media drives the narrative, and media drives facts, then it means that everything that we do, whether it's like on ABC from 9:30 to 10 p.m., or if it's on stage or in Congress, it all matters. And so it's also given me a way to translate, like continue the conversation that my character has started even, where that was a comfortable space for me at first, talking about what Zoe was going through and then realizing that people wanted to know what Yara was going through and her thoughts on that. I'm talking about myself in the third person, goodness. But it's a cool space to be in because you're allowed to use, I guess, what you're passionate about, your art, and then find a way in which that fits into the political landscape and use that as a way of bettering or help furthering your community or society.
I heard a quote recently that said it's harder to ignore stories you know. And it speaks to the importance of representation. And so I'm interested to hear from you, Rowan, in sort of how does the idea of representation and the importance of different stories and narratives that you want to get out there, how does that affect the types of roles that you choose to take on?
I think for me, especially being an actress, it's so incredibly important to me to be able to make things that have an impact and have a change on somebody. I think actors have an incredibly unique opportunity, hopefully, to be able to choose the projects that they're involved with. I mean, sometimes you can't choose the projects that you are involved with, and sometimes they evolve into things that you didn't intend for it to be. But I think for the most part, especially for Yara and I, it's really, really incredibly important for us to be very aware of the impact that we have just individually on things and our place in them. I think, especially being a part of Wrinkle in Time right now, I kind of got to be on that set maybe the day after, like 2 days after the election, and to be able to be in a set that's so accepting and so incredibly diverse and with a focus, especially in representation on stories that haven't been told. I think being in that set was comforting, especially after the days of that. But I think when it comes to representation, actually Ava said something, and I might be loosely misquoting her, but she was like, I'm not as concerned with diversity as I am with representation. And I think that's really true, because you can have a project that's incredibly diverse where all the people of color are playing drug dealers and all the women are playing like victims of sexual assault. So I think we have to be more concerned about the actual representation and what they're representing, rather than if a project like is actually diverse, I guess. Yeah.
Now I'm gonna borrow your mic again. So I'm also going to borrow an incredible two-part question that I'm actually just stealing from your podcast interview with Janet Mock, who's an incredible LGBTQ and trans activist. And if you guys haven't heard the podcast that Grace did, podcast interview that Grace did, you must check it out. Women of the Hour is where it's on, I believe. Great. So you asked this question, and I think it's a great one for today. You said two things. What's something you feel really angry about in the world today? Which there could be millions of answers to that, but choose one. And then the other thing is, what's something you feel really hopeful about right now? And hopefully I'll kick it off to you to answer the questions.
I feel really, really hopeful about young people. And I feel really, really hopeful about the fact that we, all the different parts of us and kinds of us, are not willing to accept the way that things are. And I just believe that that's the case. And I think there's this, ongoing myth that young people aren't engaged with politics, that there's a culture of disengagement, and it's just not true. And when people tell you that you're disengaged, that's a misread of deeply believing that the way that things are is wrong and that things need to be a different way. And I think that is like such a powerful, powerful thing that really like unites young people across so many different like ways of life and so many different strands of being and thinking. So that's something I really believe in. Something I feel really angry about. Oh my God. Oh my God. I think I'd actually need to think about it. Okay, I could, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Let's do it. Do you want to go first on this one?
Whatever you think.
Or how about if you guys don't want to answer both, you can answer one.
Clearly, this is a real stumper.
Thanks, Grace.
Yeah, something I feel hopeful about, just to kind of echo what Grace said. I learned about feminism and I learned about intersectional feminism because I was being shown like a feminism that was very white and very exclusive. And I learned actually about intersectional feminism, like not from textbooks, not from my teachers, but from young people on Tumblr who were like, this is what this word means, and this is what this word means, and this is why this is problematic and why we should look over here. And so I owe like a lot of what I do to young people for like educating me about things that I wasn't aware of in a matter that didn't feel like I was being talked down to, just like this is what's going on. So that makes me incredibly hopeful. I mean, I think historically, like young people are always at the front of these movements, like they're always the driving force behind them. And I think that shows currently because young people are just willing to risk more. Like there's less of a conditioning. You're more aware of the kind of institutions and structures that you're facing, that you're up against. And I think young people are really good at being able to bound together in a way that I don't see a lot of adults do. And so that definitely makes me hopeful, is to be able to see the way that young people are so accepting and open to learn different things and ask questions. And that's such an important part of activism, is being able to be comfortable with like, hey, I don't really know why this is, but can you please explain it to me? And people are always willing to do that, I think, with especially young people and the young internet queens. So yeah.
Yeah, I think we're all pretty hopeful about the same thing then, because in being a part of Generation Z, what I love the most about it is our willingness to learn and our willingness to educate one another. Being that I feel like I became a humanitarian feminist, activist, intersectional feminist, all those terms, because of my love of history and because I was learning about different cultures and identities and ways of being in a space in which I could recognize the interconnectedness of it all, as well as how necessary it is to be different from one another and how it helps in our collective progression. And one thing that I definitely see is that there's so many platforms, like you're saying, to learn and to teach one another. And so we are officially surpassing the conversation of clapbacks and like, here's a witty response to shut you down, but rather a constructive conversation in which we are looking for a positive end result. It is no longer just about who is winning this argument, but how can we collectively move forward, in which case there is a new space for us to grow together, because it is intimidating to feel as though you have to enter the world knowing everything, and that you have to enter this space of activism already knowing the terms and the right things to say, in which case our generation has kind of become comfortable with in our revolutions and been comfortable in helping one another grow and in trying to, I guess, compensate for what we don't know. And it's allowed me to learn exponentially, especially in these past couple years in this one election cycle. The amount that I have learned from podcasts to Twitter to Tumblr to Instagram has been so exponential.
Did you want to finish?
Okay, go. Well, the thing I was thinking is that, no, I don't need to be rescued. The thing I was thinking is that I think a lot of times it's hard for me to distinguish between what makes me angry and what makes me sad. Usually they're the same. But one thing I've been feeling really sad about lately, and kind of struggling with both in terms of watching this and in the world and in some of my interpersonal relationships, is it makes me really sad when I think a culture of fear and scarcity leads people to kind of try to determine and make decisions about who's suffering and who's having a hard time. So what I mean, namely, is watching people act like they get to decide who is a woman and who suffers from misogyny and who is harmed by a culture of misogyny. And that's something that I'm dealing with in a lot of my interpersonal relationships, is watching people in my life who are cis women who have really, really struggled in a culture of misogyny and patriarchy, have a lot of fear around people who they maybe formerly didn't understand as women, asserting that they too are really struggling and that they too are really, really harmed. And I just really want to move away in my relationships in my community and in the world from any kind of scarcity when it comes to suffering, especially around who gets to be a woman, whether that's about the gender you were assigned at birth, your size, what race you are, your ability, your disability, that like we need to move towards expansiveness, not towards setting limits around who is what and who is harmed by what.
Well said. So we talk a lot about like being woke and whatnot, and I think that's the new currency, right? It's not even how chic you are now, it's like how woke are you? So I'm curious, how do you get woke? Like, what are you reading? What podcasts are feeding your mind, your spirit? Yeah, I want to know, and especially right now, with a culture that's so rich with art.
Yeah.
What are you guys tuning into? What's inspiring you right now?
I think for me, it's incredibly important to like make sure that I'm actually like putting my money where my mouth is and like seeing films that are made by like directors that have been like historically pressed out. So like this past year, I kind of made a point to see like a lot of independent film made by women and queer artists that like otherwise wouldn't get too many people to go see their films because people just don't want to like publicize that. So for me, it was really important to like talk about Moonlight, to talk about American Honey, to talk about certain women, these films that like wouldn't get seen or made if they, you know, if we didn't talk about them. Like I was thinking about this, especially after the Oscars, like, yes, awards don't necessarily make something great, but at the same time, like, the number of queer films, the number of black films that will get greenlit because Moonlight won Best Picture is so exponential and major. So, yeah, I feel like, I don't know, I was texting my friend Sasha, who's in American Honey, we were just talking about how, like, awards don't really necessarily matter, but at the same time, it opens it up to such a bigger audience than it normally would. Yeah.
Wokeness is a spectrum. But I would have to say that I am a podcast consumer. And for me, it's my way of, I'm on set, and being on set is such a fabulous place to be because of the stories that we're telling. And at the same time, it can be a bit of a bubble because we get to discuss issues that matter to us in this safe setting, but that is not what the world is like all of the time. And so my NPR One app keeps me sane and grounded. But more than that, I think podcasts are such a great way of spreading information, and it's something that's so accessible to everybody. And as I feel like as somebody who learns through music and through stories and through storytelling, things like Code Switch, there are so many platforms in which we can discuss really the intersectionality and the detail of a certain identity. There's no longer a need to broad stroke what a certain identity or way of being is like, because we have the platform to really get into the detail of it and understand that our experiences aren't monolithic. Even if it seems like we have everything in common, our experiences are different, and there's no need anymore to feel as though we must all fit into one experience to be of one community, and that we can appreciate our community and appreciate our different experiences at the same time. And I feel like podcasts for me are a way of appreciating ways of being that I may not be a part of, or ways of being that I am not familiar with, because I think as I familiarize it with myself and help normalize it for myself, it gives me the space to help normalize it for the people around me as well.
I wish I could just give like a 10-minute long list of people to follow on Facebook and Instagram, because I truly okay, I will. Okay. Because I truly feel like my friends and people who I'm connected to on social media are producing like the best poetry and philosophy and political critique out there. Like every day I'm just like, oh my God, like you just said that, like just like can't believe how much brilliance there is. And that is the best thing I think about, for me, like even with all the difficult stuff, what is most powerful for me about social media is just that I have access to so much like creativity that I wouldn't have been able to access 10 years ago, let alone 20 years ago, because I'm also like a huge history buff. But what's really hard is to go back in time and be like, I want to read a canon of like trans literature. I want to read literature by trans people of color. Like that kind of work was blocked from being archived and blocked from being published. So it can be really difficult to go back in time and kind of like correct this canon we've been taught. Because when I think about myself at 15, like when I still was like, I want to impress boys, like I need to see all the French New Wave films, you know? And it's like, why did I want to see French New Wave films? Like those were literally all like just movies and books by white men that I thought I had to read to like be someone who was valuable, you know? And that sucks. Like I don't want to watch that stuff. Like, or maybe like in comparison to other stuff that's better, but I think it's really hard to go back and correct what we've been taught about what work is important, because a lot of that work didn't even have like a platform to necessarily be like remembered or archived. So I'm really grateful for the way that people now get to have power over their own work and share it when they want to.
Oh yeah, I mean, it brings me to a side point of we're really creating our own canon now and are in charge of how we will be archived and how we will be viewed by future generations. I was just at the NMAHC, which is the African American History Museum in DC, which is incredible. I was there for the second time, and the person taking us around, her name is Timothy Ann, and she's amazing, but she was explaining what her job was, and her job is to collect current history, and her job is to help in the process of archiving history, in which case she has taken it upon herself to really say, okay, it's great, there are certain things that will always be archived, but I want to go to the hip-hop musicians who have formed a culture, and I want to go to these new artists that are not or are not getting proper recognition, and I want to make sure their work is saved. And it's something, it made me realize that we are in charge of that as well, and deciding what gets saved. We're in a day and age in which we're able to share so easily, which is incredible, but at the same time, I like to call it the 24-minute news cycle, in that things are forgotten just as easily. And so it's important to make sure that we support those artists and support those movies and directors and people that we love so much, to the extent in which we make sure that we are, I guess, saving their impact and allowing other people to appreciate their impact by archiving it and by appreciating it in a public space.
I guess part of what I've kind of learned with having to show myself the history that I want to see, which is the history that I know made it so we can have this conversation today, which is not the history that's in textbooks. Like I have to, and I think we all kind of have to really dedicate ourselves to like researching that history, and you have to go deep because that history was not covered. For Women's History Month, I was kind of trying to kind of use my Instagram page as a way of like highlighting women that like weren't Susan B. Anthony, like women that didn't get the opportunity to have their history presented in a way that was like, this woman actually made history, like it's the reason why we're able to have this conversation. But I noticed that like you have to really do that research for yourself, because so much of their work wasn't saved. It wasn't archived. It wasn't put into museums. So I noticed that for me, like I think there's an Instagram page called like LGBT history, and they do something really cool. There's one that's like women in of the past, maybe. And so I noticed that I kind of learned my history from the internet and from Instagram and from following really cool artists that are highlighting artists who made it so they're able to do the work that they do today. So yeah, but I noticed that we have to do a lot of that ourselves, which is unfortunate, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's so true. As a high school student, the AP courses means that there is a set curricula that you're being taught. And it's, I think, sophomore year, they were like, yeah, you really won't learn about women or be tested on women. So here's Voltaire. But and while I love Voltaire and Candide, at the same time, it is important to do our research and find those people that have made this conversation possible. Like for me, James Baldwin is that person. And fortunately, I got that introduction through reading Sonny's Blues in English class. But not everybody gets that introduction. And so depending on what you're learning in school, it's important to go above and beyond, because it's more than, I feel like it makes what you're learning worth it. And it makes what you're learning, it gives purpose to what you're learning, because there's an active component to it. There's an active component to I'm learning this to then be able to continue what that person is doing. And so I feel like that's why I've enjoyed my educational path so far, because of supplementing what's not being taught.
Speaking of James Baldwin, we had you write a little review of the film I Am Not Your Negro, which is so powerful and so important, and I really recommend you guys seeing it. Maybe you can just give a quick overview of who James Baldwin is for those in the audience who don't know, and how his legacy really speaks directly to the theme of this panel, which is the intersection of art and activism.
Okay. I'm going to try to keep this brief.
You have 60 seconds.
Okay. I think I prefaced what I wrote for Teen Vogue by saying that I talk about James Baldwin like somebody will talk about a boy band, and that I get extremely excited. And it's like, oh my God, did you hear his new transcript came out? They're releasing it. Oh my goodness, I'll be there. But James Baldwin is an author, a poet, a public speaker. I talk about him in the present because his work lives on. And I'd have to say that what I loved so much about him is that he really did, in this time of the civil rights movement and the LGBTQ movement, be the intersection for that. Being a black gay man, he talked about the fact that he did not fit into either monolithic experience, and how he struggled with finding a community when neither community was accepting of the other half of his identity. And so not only did he do such a beautiful job of bringing that to light and bringing to light, I guess, the realities that people were living in which case he was saying, like, when you see these narratives of black people as these thieves or as people who are raiding and rioting, you have to understand the circumstances that we've been brought into. And his work really highlighted that, highlighted the fact that so many times young boys and girls were hitting the limit of their potential, not because of their own unwillingness to learn and educate, but rather because of society's unwillingness to let them grow. Yeah. And because of that, I think his work really is something that speaks so well to what's happening right now. There's one conversation that he had, you can find it anywhere, it's with William F. Buckley at Cambridge University. It is one of the best things ever, in which he says, it's something I quote all the time, there comes an age around that, comes a time around the age of 5 or 6 or 7 in which you realize that the flag that you pledged allegiance to along with everybody else did not pledge allegiance to you. In which case it really talks about the importance of creating a space in which we can all thrive, because that is not how our society was built, but it is how our society can be formed and shaped into. Woo! I love James Baldwin.
How'd you do on time? That was incredible. I want to touch on privilege for a minute. My friend and writer, Lovey, who has a book called I'm Judging You. It's hilarious. I'm reading it on my way back to New York today. So she describes privilege this way: the things not within our control that push us forward or hold us back. So how do you guys balance and check your own privilege as public-facing activists?
I was also so ready for this to turn into a panel on James Baldwin. I know. So if you want to just add a fourth panel at the end of the day. When you started talking about that, I thought of this this thing that a close friend of mine and an activist I really look up to taught me maybe like 2 years ago. She explained to me the difference between power within and power without. So, and for me that was like a real game changer in terms of trying to like locate my own power and what kinds of power nourish me and feel good to me and what kinds of power don't. So power without being like, because of how your body and identity is read, the access that you're given, the mobility that you're given, the power that is projected onto you, and power from within being like your power, your personal self-determination, self-realization. So, you know, the difference between accomplishing something that you've been told makes you valuable and accomplishing something that you like learn and find the strength to locate as like just that you don't have the words for it, like that other fulfillment where you're like, I did that. Like I did that. So for me, it's about just constantly questioning my own expectations for myself. Like if I want something, just stepping back and thinking, why do I want that? Do I want that because someone told me that someone like me is supposed to have that? Or do I want that because I've come to a place where I realize that that's going to nourish me and the people that I love? So sometimes that's about money, sometimes that's about achievement, but it's just always just taking the time to ask myself those questions. And the reason that's really useful for me is because the answers are going to be different for everyone, because we've all been told that we can expect different things for ourselves because of who we are. And I've been told that there's a particular path that's available to me because of stuff like whiteness and class privilege. And it's very, very important for me and a huge part of my practice to always step back and question that, because I don't want to just follow that path. I want to make different decisions. And if I am going to benefit from power without, I don't want to just get ahead. I want that to be about community, the people that I love, modeling a different world and a different way of being and relating to one another. So that was a real shift to be able to think in that way.
I'm gonna keep that.
Yeah.
That's a really good one.
I think a huge part of activism too, especially with whatever power and privilege that you do hold, is to be able to step back and let the people who actually experiencing the thing that you're trying to talk about talk. Like 2 years ago, I think it was almost 2 years ago, I wrote an essay on intersectional feminism that I think initially kind of put me in like this feminist climate. But it was like maybe 2-3 months after my friend Amanda made their initial video about cultural appropriation. And when I talked about it in my essay, I was like, and, you know, for me talking about this, like, I'm able to talk about this so much more freely than Amanda is. And exactly what I kind of predicted happening in the essay, like, actually happened, where I was kind of really praised for, like, writing this essay about intersectionality when Amanda, who, like, actually firsthand experiences the racism that I do not experience, was, like, shunned for talking about this thing that she experiences, not me. So I think a lot of activism for me is learning when I can step back and highlight the work of other people rather than trying to vocalize it myself. Yeah.
That's a really important distinction to make.
I guess, I mean, I do have to say I love and agree so ardently with what both of you just said. And to add to that, it does really, again, come back to this idea that there is not a monolithic experience. And if we change if our mindset is that in which there is one way of experiencing something, then it does not leave space or room for everybody to come forward and to progress together. And so checking our privileges, making sure that we understand that I am not the representative of all young Black girls who are interested in STEM and who are activists or public speakers or actors, and that there's so many of us out there. And while I am happy to be one of many voices, I am just that, one of many voices. And so understanding that we, like you said, the goal is not to be the face of anything, but rather create a space so that we all are able to appreciate that this is my individual face and this is the only thing I am the face of. I am the face of myself. And really understanding that allows us to appreciate other people's work and what they're doing and appreciate their experience and what they have to contribute. Because I understand that even as a young Black Iranian girl with the last name Shahidi and family in Iran, which just is another place that got banned from coming here, I still have privilege that other people don't have. I'm able to live in a very safe community and in spaces in which I am allowed to grow as a person, as a humanist, as an activist. I'm given these spaces, and not everybody is given that space. So how do I even check that privilege that I have to allow myself to share that space and understand that because of the space that I have, what can I do to optimize it so that it works to everybody's advantage?
Yeah, we can clap to that. I want to talk about sisterhood for a second. Grace, in your piece with your sister Lena, in this month's Teen Vogue on newsstands now, you talk about the importance of sisterhood and how it even transcends gender. And I wanted to hear you talk about that a little, because I do think that sisterhood and support and community is so essential as an activist and just as a human trying to stay sane right now. So maybe you can speak to that a little.
Well, I think, what we were talking about in that piece was, or I was talking about for me, the importance of pushing back against both the idea that sisterhood is biological and the idea that gender is biological. So like Lena is my sister, but I also actually have a lot of other sisters. And I was born with this one amazing sister, but then I've also built these other relationships, these other sisterhoods. And for me, it's like sisterhood is something very political and very profound, and I think it's always been a space of resistance in so many parts of the world and throughout history, because it's really like that relationship where you can actually, between yourself and another person, start to work out and carve out how you want the world to be. You can like set a different tone. I mean, think about when I think about even what I was doing with my friends when I was 12, and we didn't have the language for it, but we were just being like, what's up? What's happening in the world? What do people want us to be? This doesn't feel quite right. And we were working things through in a way that I wasn't doing in school. I certainly wasn't doing in the classroom. I feel like that was the most profound growing and learning that I did. That's what I was thinking about when we were talking about books and learning. I'm like, my real learning has not been in school. That doesn't mean it didn't benefit me to like work hard in school and then be able to like have opportunities I might not have otherwise. But that's not where I've like grown the most. That's not where my mind has changed and expanded. But I think the reason that it's really important to push back against the idea of sisterhood being biological is because when I think about like the most important and grounded relationships of my life really don't have to do with the genders that we were assigned at birth. It has to do with creating a space where we say, who are you? Who do you want to be? How can I reflect that back at you? This is who I want to be. It's really scary for me to tell you who that is, but like you love me unconditionally. And it's just, so like I think sisterhood is about that space where you just actually listen and you support. That's what it is to me.
Yeah, I feel like especially given this time and space that we're living in, I feel like it's become really apparent that fear preys on the idea that we will not unite and that we will not come together as a community. And so these spaces are ones in which they foster sisterhood and foster the community that we need to support one another. So many times, like you said, it's not biological. I have the great luxury and pleasure of saying that I have a great community, and two of the people of those community are sitting right at the front bench. And not everybody has that, luxury of saying that the person next to me, the person that's related to me, is somebody who reflects what I want to be and do. And so it is also important to emphasize this idea that relationships that are outside of, the biological are just as important. And even what my Teen Vogue family has given me is that space to connect with like-minded people and to connect with people that I may totally disagree with, but we both share the idea that we're going to have a conversation about why we disagree, and it's given me that space to really explore that. And so in this time, the relationships that have been built throughout the 17 years of living that I've done have really come to help support me while this policy change is happening, while I'm going into college, while I'm making all of this transition in my life.
I mean, of course, everything that they say, like, echoed back. But I think, just to expand on what Grace was saying, I think within this, like, sisterhood climate, one thing that I see that does make me angry within sort of a white feminist climate is the reinstating of binaries. When obviously, and these are feminists that are using, binary language, that believe that you're gay or you're straight, that believe that you're male or you're female. I don't know what is so glorious about those two binaries, since clearly they got us into where we're at. So I don't know. I'm trying to really, with the language that I use and with the things that I share, I'm trying to show that like our work starts in like this spectrum. It starts in this middle ground because there's been no specific space for women, for people of color, for queer people. Like we work in metaphor. Like that's our area. So I feel like when I see a lot of feminists kind of reject these binaries and like use language that's specifically at the Women's March, when I think there was a lot of signs that relate having a uterus to like being a woman and all of this like weird kind of language that just reinstates the same things that we're trying to work against. Within our sisterhood, I think that's something that I'm trying to really work on, is like making this space a really even one. When I think of the word sister, like I'm not thinking of, you know, my sister who's like my physical biological sister and somebody who was like assigned female at birth. Like I'm just kind of thinking of this word that means like getting to work together, I guess. Like it's not even something where I'm specifically, I don't know. I feel like sisterhood is, you even spoke about it in your interview with Lena, how like brotherhood is just a word that's so founded on this performance of masculinity and war and violence. And I think sisterhood is kind of where we work in that middle ground, in that metaphor. So yeah, no binaries.
I do want to quickly touch on the echo chamber, because sometimes when we can be like we're affirming each other in this sisterhood, and we're like, yes, everyone's clapping and snapping, and last night, Rowan, you were speaking about reaching outside of the echo chamber and trying to affect people who maybe think differently than you do, and hopefully inspiring them to think in broader terms. And so I would like to know, who is your audience? Like, who are you trying to impact? Who are you trying to move as activists?
I think after this election, I was really confused because I wanted to kind of join in this part that's like, what the hell were they thinking? But at the same time, I'm trying to almost understand what got us here. So I think the people that I'm trying to get actively right now are not, the 40 plus white guys who voted for Trump. Like, I'm not concerned with getting that audience onto my side. I don't care. But I'm really interested in getting like the 12-year-old girl who's commenting on my Instagram that being gay is a sin and that she's gonna go to hell. Like that's who I'm concerned about getting. So I'm trying to make this space on the internet that I think is growing, where we have celebrities and activists who are actively talking about these things and who have large platforms to work with that. Because that's the people that I'm really interested in getting. I do think I experience an echo chamber. I mean, I experience myself having these conversations with people who are already on my side, who I don't need to get onto my side. So I think for me, I'm most concerned with getting the people who are somewhere in the middle, who were raised in families that are inherently oppressive. Like, that's who I want to get. It's not the people who are far right, the people that I'm never going to be able to get onto my side. It's the people that are like wondering. It's the young people. It's the people who are going to vote in 2018 when we have all of our House and Senate people up for chairs. Like that's who I want to get now.
But how have you adjusted your tactics and your messaging to do that effectively, sort of post-Trump?
Yeah, I think one thing that I can notice myself doing, and I think this actually is privilege that I'm trying to recognize more and more. I mean, I went to a liberal Valley public school. I was lucky enough to have resources, to have parents that would allow me to see these weird documentaries and allow me to, see a lot of art that I wouldn't normally have been able to see, and that opened up a lot of my peripheral views and allowed me to see a lot of other experiences. So I think the language that I'm trying to use now on social media for the people who don't live in LA, for people who don't go to schools that are open and accepting, is just to kind of show this in a way and introduce these words in a way that doesn't feel like, oh, why don't you know the definition of this word yet? It's 2017. Right. Like, I want to be like, okay, so you don't know what this word means? Here's what it means, and here's where we can work with that. Because I feel like if we reject these people who have just not had the exposure that I have had, then we're doing nothing. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, post-election, I feel like everybody had kind of re-examined their platform and their audience. And while, like you said, social media is a great place to be reaffirmed, and it's a great place to follow the people that you admire and love and think the same way or think slightly evolved. And at the same time, it's an important place to have those conversations with people that may not necessarily agree with you. And I feel like I've personally done so. Sorry about my scratchy voice. I have personally done so by making, I guess, my message very as human as possible. So many times when you think about these issues that we're faced with, it's so theoretical. It is so floating in the ethos somewhere that when people say defund Planned Parenthood, they don't understand what they're defunding. They don't fully understand the human side of what's happening. When they say, okay, we want this wall, we want this ban, they don't understand what's really happening. When they say, okay, maybe a merit system for immigration, they don't physically understand the human lives that are at stake, but rather the very theoretical, and this is what will happen to the economy, and this is what will happen to my life. And so by making our messages, and I think another thing that brings it back to our art, we're able to make our art and our activism so human and relatable that you understand that we are going through such a similar experience that there is no reason, and I cannot think or fathom a reason in which you would want to work actively against me or what I'm trying to do. And that's why movies like Moonlight are so important, because in that, people saw a love story. And at the same time, Moonlight was not avoiding the conversation that that it is not heteronormative, and they're not avoiding the conversation that these two main characters are people of color, but rather embracing that. And at the same time, amidst all of that, you see a love story that you can connect to. And so within that art, we have a space to say, this is who we are affecting, and this is why you want to stand with us versus against us. It is not this is not something that you can vote on without thinking of who it truly is affecting, and it's not something you can vote on while just thinking of the theory behind it or the legal policy behind it, but thinking about the humans behind it.
Yeah, I mean, I really just try super hard not to play the blame game, and I definitely don't see that as my job. And I try to remind myself all the time that even if people are coming to wildly different conclusions than me about what they think needs to happen, it's because they're in pain too, and they're also suffering, and they also feel really lost about how to live a meaningful and happy and safe life. And I get really sad about the fact that people could reach such wildly different conclusions because of that pain and that suffering. But I think for me, I don't know, I think for me, what I hope is that I can do work and make art that will maybe at best help people understand that their suffering might be because there's a lot of really unfair expectations for how people are supposed to live their lives, and that we're told to be things that most of us actually can't be, whether that's a man or a woman, which most of us can't really be, or rich or famous or hyper successful, that there's so many things in the way at the same time that we're being told that's what we're supposed to become. And that basically sets everyone up to feel pretty bad and pretty lonely and have a hard time really believing in and loving themselves. I feel really upset about how effective some really negative movements and forces have been at taking that suffering and directing it towards the outcome of the current administration that we're dealing with. But I don't know if feeling angry at the individual people who have been a part of that is necessarily gonna be what gets us out of that mess.
Taking us to church today, guys. So I think a great way to wrap up the panel would be for everyone to kind of go around and say just one piece of art that someone in this space must go see, read, experience. So for me, there is a podcast called On Being. So good, right? By the way, you have put me on to NPR. That is all I listen to. So thank you. But On Being, and there's an interview with a woman named Isabel Wilkerson, and it's called "The Heart Is the Last Frontier," and she talks about specifically the role of an artist in terms of changing hearts, and she says that the role of let me make sure I get it right. She says it's up to politicians to change policies. It's up to artists to change hearts. I felt that one. That was good. As Rowan says, sizzle. It was good. So that's my one, but I want to go around and each of you guys share one piece of art that everyone must see.
Well, actually, someone who's going to be on the third panel today, who's my dear friend Raina Gossett, is just finishing up a short film about Martha P. Johnson, who, if some of you don't know who she was a Black trans woman who was part of a group of trans women of color who actually started the Stonewall riot, and were part of an amazing group of organizers in the late 60s and 70s in New York who were kind of supporting one another and really pushing a feminism that centered women and femmes and queer people who were being really harmed by police, who were being harmed by the prison system, and ended up kind of being pushed out of some of the more mainstream gay rights movements that we now think about when we think about gay rights in that period. But Raina made this movie. I also happen to be in it, but that feels like it's actually not a shameless plug. It's really not. I just like to forget that I'm in it because I feel so self-conscious seeing myself on screen. But Raina's movie is beautiful and powerful and is a portal to another world. And everybody just keep your eyes peeled for it because it's like exactly what every time I watch it, I'm just like, it's called Happy Birthday, Marcia.
I would have to say Sonny's Blues by James Baldwin. I'm going to take it back to James Baldwin because I think that was one of the most inspiring pieces of literature that I had read. And of course, another one would be Notes of a Native Son, which is another great book of essays. You know what? Scratch that. I'm going to do another James Baldwin thing. It's going to be The Devil Finds Work by James Baldwin, which actually, the reason I chose that is because it really speaks to what we're talking about today and the role of art in this setting. He really goes into depth about like the role of Sidney Poitier and Harry Belafonte during the civil rights movement as artists. And I think that it's such a powerful thing to read because even then he recognized the role of, I guess, our jobs in society when we are trying to affect social change.
I have to give you a whole list at some point that you guys have to publish because this is really long. But if I had to like start somewhere with something that you can access online, Barbara Kruger, you should look up her art. She makes kind of poster work and she uses captions that kind of just make you think and images that make you think. You guys know the Supreme logo? So they ripped her off. That's like her aesthetic. But anyway, so Barbara Kruger, you guys should just all go look up her work because it's pretty insane and amazing. But Jenny Holzer's Truisms. I'm also thinking about just go and look up Audre Lorde poetry. Like, just like a day full of like work that was totally overlooked and like buried. I know that I'm seeing a show next week that I think was just at the Brooklyn Museum, Carrie James Marshall, which I'm sure you guys have maybe seen on Instagram or something, but I just looked up all those pictures beforehand, and that's pretty incredible. I have a really long list, as you can see. When you guys were talking, my mind was like going. Agnes Varda, woman director, totally made all of these like radical short films. Go watch her Black Panthers film. I feel like when you were talking about like having to watch all these French New Wave films to like impress guys, she's an exception, but like also I feel like if we really do like our research, there were like so many films coming out at that time that were made by women and made by people of color that are like really cool and like cooler than a lot of the French New Wave films. So I mean, I just kind of spend a lot of time on YouTube and just kind of go down a really long rabbit hole. So I recommend that you do the same.
Amazing. Hopefully you guys got all of that written down in your note section on your phone. I didn't see people pulling out their phones. I just want to say a huge thank you to each of you for being a part of today's conversation. We could do this all day long, but unfortunately we have to pass the mic to the next panel. Thank you all for coming.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Stay tuned. 2 more panels coming up next.